a new family in the suburbs. The early autumn sun was just beginning to cast a gentle glow over Willow Creek, a quiet suburb about 30 miles from downtown Chicago. This neighborhood, full of neat lawns, picket fences, and tree-lined streets, was the kind of place where neighbors stopped to chat over hedges and children biked home from school in small, laughing packs. At the end of Maplewood Drive stood a two-story colonial house with blue shutters, the place Emma now called home. Emma locked her car and glanced at the house with a mix of hope and nervousness. Everything was so different here. Raised in a bustling city in the Pacific Northwest, she had grown up surrounded by constant movement and anonymity. Now, the stillness of this new place felt both peaceful and overwhelming. She hugged her cardigan tighter around her, and balancing a reusable grocery bag on her hip, made her way to the front door. Inside, the faint aroma of cinnamon lingered from the morning's pancakes, a tradition David, her husband, had insisted on since moving in together 4 months ago. The kitchen, bright with sunlight streaming through large windows, still felt foreign. She placed the groceries on the marble counter, glancing at the family photos on the refrigerator. Half of them were new, awkwardly wedged alongside old snapshots, recent pictures of Emma with David, hoping to capture the start of this new chapter alongside years' worth of Hannah and Ben's childhood moments. David's laughter echoed from the living room. He was playing a board game with Ben, who giggled whenever his father made up silly rules. Hannah, at 14, rarely left her room on weekends unless necessary. Her presence in any communal space was marked by her silence or short answers. Emma had read plenty of articles and step-parent handbooks about the adjustment period, but none had described the invisible barrier she felt each morning, a wall she couldn't see but always sensed. As Emma moved quietly upstairs to check the laundry, she paused in front of Hannah's door. Music played softly from behind it, Hannah's chosen shield against the outside world. Emma considered knocking, but decided against it, not wanting to intrude. In these early days, even the smallest interactions felt charged. She knew trust would not be immediate, but she couldn't help longing for a simple smile or casual greeting. Downstairs, the cozy living room served as the nerve center of the house, books piled on the coffee table, Ben's sneakers askew by the door, a blanket draped carelessly across the couch. Signs of family, Emma thought, but she still struggled to find her place among them. The division was often subtle, but unmistakable. At dinner, conversation frequently drifted toward memories she had not shared, stories of vacations before her, inside jokes, born of years she hadn't been part of. Emma did her best to listen, to laugh at the right moments, to belong. The neighborhood itself presented another layer of challenge. Willow Creek residents had mastered the art of small talk, but beneath their cordial greetings was a curiosity verging on suspicion. Emma sometimes caught them watching from behind curtains as she gardened or walked the dog. In whispered tones at block parties or PTA meetings, they made note of her new wife status. She reminded herself that blending families took time, and that judgment, however subtle, was just human nature. Still, the feeling of being scrutinized weighed heavy on her daily routine. To complicate matters, Lisa, David's ex-wife and the children's mother, lived just 3 blocks away. She always seemed to appear unexpectedly at school events, soccer games, or even the grocery store. Her presence was a constant reminder of the life that had come before Emma, and her opinion seemed to carry considerable weight with Hannah and Ben. While outwardly polite, Lisa's measured words and lingering gazes left no doubt Emma was an outsider trying to fill a role she could never truly own. Yet, within all this unfamiliarity, hope lingered. On some afternoons when Ben asked Emma for help with homework, or when David reached for her hand after a long day, she felt small threads of connection weaving themselves quietly into the tapestry of their lives. It was these moments, fragile and infrequent, that convinced Emma to keep trying. As the sky grew orange with sunset, she stepped onto the back porch. The hum of distant lawnmowers and the scent of freshly cut grass filled the air. Leaning on the railing, Emma looked out at the quiet cul-de-sac, determined to believe that every new beginning, however complicated, carried with it the possibility of belonging. Glances of doubt. Emma soon realized that the beautiful quiet of Willow Creek could become stifling, especially within the walls of her own home. The honeymoon phase of their blended family was already beginning to fade, replaced by a subtle but persistent current of skepticism and discomfort. Small slights and sideways glances seemed to accumulate with each passing day, making Emma question her every action and word. It started with the children's chilly politeness. Hannah, her eyes often flickering up from her phone only to study Emma with an unreadable expression, treated Emma as though she were an unwelcome guest overstaying her visit. Every invitation to participate, be it breakfast, a movie night, or a simple afternoon walk, was met with a monosyllabic, "No thanks." Hannah became an expert at filling awkward silences with the white noise of music or the rapid, insistent tapping of her fingertips on her phone screen. Ben, just 10, was less guarded, but his loyalty to his sister, and by extension to his mother, was clear. He accepted Emma's help begrudgingly, rarely making eye contact, his trust held in check by invisible boundaries Emma struggled to even see. Emma's attempts to bond often seemed to backfire. Suggestion for a board game night was answered by groans. Her plan to cook Hannah's favorite macaroni and cheese ended with Hannah announcing she wasn't hungry before heading to her room. When Emma tried to help Ben with a science project, he insisted on waiting for David, his voice tinged with irritation. Dad knows how to do it right. Outside the home, the neighbors of Willow Creek seemed to echo the children's reserved skepticism, only in more socially acceptable ways. Mrs. Callahan, the elderly woman next door, would smile politely, but lean in a little closer to listen whenever Emma spoke about her family. At the local supermarket, Emma sometimes overheard snippets of conversation, the new wife, followed by awkward pauses if she came too close. The town seemed stuck in a state of watchful curiosity, as if everyone was waiting to see if Emma would slip up. The true architect of this atmosphere, though, was Lisa. With grace that came off more as calculation, Lisa placed herself precisely at the intersections of Emma's new life. It seemed as if every time Emma dropped the kids off at school, Lisa would arrive moments later with a dazzling smile, exchanging knowing glances with mothers nearby. At soccer games, Lisa never openly criticized, but her presence felt like a shadow Emma could never quite escape. And Lisa was always careful, a soft word here about how difficult the adjustment must be for Emma, a half-hearted concern there about Ben missing his old routines. Conversations with the children after Lisa's visits often took on a sharper edge. Hannah's answers became clipped and guarded, and Ben's attitude was more stubborn. Emma realized Lisa didn't need to say anything directly to plant seeds of doubt. A gentle nudge was all it took to reinforce the notion that Emma was not only an outsider but a possible threat to the bonds the family once had. David, eager to keep the peace, seemed either unwilling or unable to notice the shift. He encouraged Emma to give it time and reminded her how hard the transition was for everyone. Sometimes, after the children retreated to their rooms, he would take Emma's hand, his eyes kind but weary, whispering, "They'll come around. Just keep being yourself." There were days when Emma questioned what herself even meant. In her old life, she had been confident, self-sufficient. Here, each interaction bore a new weight. Should she press for closeness or give the children space? Was it better to participate in school events or leave them to Lisa and David? The uncertainty gnawed at her, making every decision feel fraught. The evidence of Emma's outsider status was everywhere, yet so subtle as to make her feel melodramatic for noticing it. A family photo on Ben's dresser, with a corner of her face cropped out. An old birthday card from Lisa placed front and center on Hannah's bookshelf. Even the family dog, Sadie, seemed to hesitate before settling at Emma's feet. Still, there were glimmers that gave her hope. One afternoon, after an especially tense dinner, Ben lingered in the hallway to ask Emma if she knew how to tie a particular kind of knot he needed for scouts. Emma almost cried from relief at his question, but she simply knelt down and showed him quietly, savoring the uncomplicated moment. That night, she wished more than anything that trust could be folded and tied, strong and neat, the way she had shown Ben. But as the days wore on, Emma couldn't escape the feeling that she was being constantly measured and never quite found enough. She wondered if the day would ever come when a skeptical glance turned into acceptance, or at least indifference. For now, doubt lingered everywhere, in the home, on the street, and most painfully, in the eyes of those she wanted desperately to reach. The first accusations. It didn't take long for the simmering doubt in Emma's new life to bubble over into real tension. The shift was sudden, starting with incidents so minor they almost seemed accidental, until patterns began to emerge, unmistakable and deeply unsettling. One chilly morning, a crisis erupted over a missing phone. Hannah's frustration was volcanic. She combed through every inch of her room, tossing pillows and clothes aside, panic tightening her voice with every passing minute. When Hannah finally stormed downstairs, her accusation was sharp and public. "Someone took my phone. Emma, have you seen it?" The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Emma, startled, stammered a denial, but her uncertainty lingered. David began searching alongside Hannah, trying to soothe her, but Emma couldn't help noticing the sideways glance he gave her, a flicker of suspicion, despite his gentle tone. That was only the beginning. Later in the week, Ben brought home a dismal grade on his science quiz. Usually cheerful about homework, he entered the house sullen and quiet. During dinner, he broke the silence with a mumbled complaint. "Emma distracted me while I was studying." David quickly reassured his son, but once again Emma sensed a subtle shifting of blame, as if she were somehow responsible for every mishap. Lisa's influence was never far behind these events. Word spread through the neighborhood faster than fallen leaves in the wind. At the supermarket, Emma noticed Mrs. Callahan chatting with another neighbor, glancing up briefly as Emma walked by. The phrase, "Well, since Emma moved in," drifted to her ears, followed by knowing smirks. At the PM meeting, a fellow parent nudged her friend and whispered about all the trouble lately in the Bailey house, making little effort to hide her meaning. Emma felt as if she wore a scarlet letter, visible to everyone around her. The children, once merely distant, now began wielding blame as both shield and weapon. When Ben lost his soccer cleats before a game, he insisted, "Emma put them away, somewhere weird. Now I can't find them," all without looking her way. Hannah, searching for a library book, announced to her father, "Maybe Emma threw it out by mistake. She cleaned my room, remember?" Each accusation chipped away at Emma's fragile sense of belonging. Even small misunderstandings took on an edge. An unfinished milk carton in the fridge, a missed permission slip, a forgotten appointment, all somehow traced back to Emma. The pattern was clear, and each incident served to reinforce the narrative Lisa quietly spread throughout Willow Creek. Conversations with Lisa, inevitably overheard by friends and neighbors, were laced with faux concern and careful phrasing. "Change is hard for my kids," she'd say. "They miss the way things used to be. I'm sure Emma tries her best, but it isn't easy for anyone." Her words seemed gentle, but the impact was sharp. By the time school administrators and other parents repeated the stories, Emma had become the root of the Bailey family's every struggle. Emma's frustration grew, colored by a fresh sense of helplessness. She longed to defend herself, but found no safe opening. She worried that her protests would only deepen the wedge between herself and the children. David, for his part, seemed torn, quietly attempting to balance support for his wife with his desire for family harmony. Sometimes he offered Emma a tired, apologetic smile. Other times, his silence felt like a quiet indictment all its own. On the worst evenings, Emma retreated to her bedroom, scrolling through old messages from friends back west, reminding herself who she had once been. She wondered whether the new identity pressed upon her, that of the unwanted interloper, the outsider blamed for every misfortune, would ever fade. Still, there were moments, fleeting but real, when Ben would ask for her help tying his shoes, or Hannah would grudgingly accept a ride to practice. Those instances gave Emma strength, but the constant accusations weighed on her spirit like a winter coat she couldn't take off. By the end of the month, Emma understood that she had reached a crossroads. The accusations were no longer isolated, they were becoming part of the family's story. Whether she could ever unravel the web of blame or clear her name remained uncertain. But even as she prepared for yet another sleepless night, Emma resolved that she would not disappear beneath these false narratives. Somehow, she would find a way to protect herself, and perhaps reclaim the fragile hope of belonging in the place she now called home. The pit of injustice. As October wore on, and the bright leaves began to pile on sidewalks, the air in the Bailey household shifted once again, from tense to treacherous. The thin line between discomfort and outright injustice was crossed so quietly at first that Emma barely recognized it. But before long, the subtle undercurrents of accusation that had haunted her became waves, determined to pull her under. It began, as so many troubles do, with something painfully small. One Wednesday morning, Emma found the contents of Ben's backpack strewn across the kitchen floor. Textbooks, crumpled assignments, an open juice box, leaving a sticky trail across the tile. She knelt to gather everything, drying the spilled juice and sorting through the mess. When Ben stormed into the kitchen, his face crumpled with accusation. "Why did you take my art project out? You ruined it." His words struck harder than expected. Emma explained patiently that she'd only been cleaning up what she found, but Ben wouldn't hear it. By dinner, the story had changed. David came home to hear, "Emma messed up my homework, and now I'm going to get a bad grade." No amount of reassurance or rational explanation seemed to help. For the first time, David's patience appeared to wear thin. His tone, gentle with Ben, grew doubtful toward Emma. "Did you really go through his things? Maybe you should ask next time." The next day brought a larger storm. Upon picking Hannah up from school, Emma was approached by a guidance counselor in the sunlight-drenched parking lot. With hushed professionalism, the counselor mentioned that Hannah had seemed distressed in class and had described home as not comfortable. The look on the counselor's face was not openly accusing, but Emma recognized the wariness in her eyes. She tried to explain that the family was still adjusting, that things had been hard, but her words sounded feeble even to herself. Hannah barely spoke to her during the drive home. Her body language closed, face turned toward the window the entire way. Later that week, neighbors began asking odd questions. At the mailbox, Mrs. Callahan commented on how brave Emma was for taking on so much. Her voice edged with a sympathy that didn't seem genuine. At the grocery store, a man from 2 doors down hesitated in the cereal aisle, asking, "Everything all right at your place? Haven't seen the kids at the bus stop much?" When Emma replied that everything was fine, his eyebrows rose, doubt, as always, hiding just beneath the thin skin of small-town courtesy. Lisa, never far from the center of trouble, appeared at their door one gray afternoon, holding a pair of hand-me-down winter coats. "I just wanted to be sure the kids had what they needed," she explained loudly enough for the neighbor watering their lawn to overhear. "You know, Ben can get so sensitive about changes." Hannah, too. Her words seemed forged for an audience. David welcomed her in, but Emma, acutely aware of her outsider status, could only stand silently by as Lisa fussed over the children, all while shooting thin, pointed glances in Emma's direction. What Emma could not have anticipated was how quickly and dangerously things would escalate. On a quiet Friday morning, she was startled by the ringing of their landline, a call from Officer Rodriguez, the neighborhood police liaison. "Mrs. Bailey, we've received a report from the school about some unusual behavior from your stepchildren. Could I come by this afternoon to chat? Just routine." The world spun beneath Emma's feet as she agreed to the visit, her hands shaking as she hung up. Although the officer was polite, his questions were pointed. Had there been shouting in the house? Was anyone feeling neglected or threatened? Had she ever raised her voice or touched the children in anger? Emma, mortified, answered everything with calm honesty, but knew as she looked into the officer's eyes that suspicion clung stubbornly to her name, refusing to be dislodged by logic or truth. After Officer Rodriguez left, Emma locked herself in the upstairs bathroom, staring at her pale reflection. Fatigue tugged at the corners of her eyes. She wondered how an ordinary life, packing lunches, doing laundry, driving to soccer practice, could spiral so swiftly into a police report. It was as though she'd become the focus of some invisible tribunal, the subject of a trial she had no hope of winning. That evening, Hannah and Ben spoke in anxious whispers behind their bedroom door. Emma feared what stories were being woven in those secret moments. Stories that neighbors would soon repeat. Stories that teachers would discuss in break rooms. Stories that would eventually find their way back to Lisa's eager ears. She felt walls growing ever higher between herself and the life she'd once imagined in Willow Creek. A peaceful home, the warmth of acceptance, the slow building trust of family. Worst of all was the chilling effect on her work. Emma, a remote marketing manager for a Seattle-based firm, relied on long stretches of concentration. But the steady drip of stress, accusations, doubts, neighborly scrutiny sapped her focus. On Monday, her supervisor emailed to say a client had complained Emma was slow to respond. The local gossip grapevine had already reached her boss. "I heard you're having some family drama, Em. Everything good?" The professional life Emma had built over years of effort suddenly felt as insecure as everything else. David tried to be supportive, but his soothing words now came with a hesitancy Emma couldn't ignore. When she raised concerns about Lisa's influence or defended herself against the accusations, David would sigh, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "It's complicated, Em. The kids are going through a lot. Maybe just try not to take it personally." It was beginning to feel as if Emma's struggles were not only invisible, but inconvenient. All around her, Emma saw signs of doubt and distance. Invitations to neighborhood gatherings dried up. Parents at school pickup eyed her cautiously. Even the school principal, when Emma called to clarify a homework policy for Ben, seemed oddly brisk. "Thank you for reaching out, Mrs. Bailey. We hope everything at home will settle down soon." Every conversation, however brief, buzzed with subtext. One cold Tuesday night, after another silent dinner, Emma finally broke down. Alone in her car at the end of the driveway, she gripped the steering wheel and let herself sob, muffling her cries for fear the children might hear. She had done nothing to earn this spiral of suspicion and blame, except perhaps to try too hard, to care for children who were determined not to be cared for by her. The knowledge that the people she most wanted to win over now saw her as the problem was a wound that would not close. At last, as she sat in the darkness, Emma understood she was at a turning point. She could not rely on time alone to heal this wound. She needed truth. She needed a way to clear her name and reclaim her dignity before her sense of self was lost for good. It was an injustice she could no longer accept with resignation. That night, Emma made herself a promise. Even if the whole world believed the rumors, she would seek out the whole story, gathering evidence, finding allies where she could, holding fast to the small kernel of hope left inside her. The road from this pit of injustice would be long, but Emma refused to be buried in it. Quietly seeking the truth, for days, Emma lived in a fog, drifting through her routines mechanically, yet inwardly determined. She'd reached the bottom of her patience, but not the end of her strength. If anything, the events of the past weeks, the accusations, the scrutiny, the chilly air at home, had hardened her resolve. Blame had become too easy a currency in the Bailey house, and Emma decided, privately, that she could not bear to carry it a moment longer. She began by observing, quietly, carefully. Trust had eroded, but clarity was restorative, and Emma watched, really watched, the patterns of the household, as if seeing her family for the first time. She noticed how Hannah lingered on her phone after school, furiously texting, her posture tense and her brow furrowed. Ben's stories at dinner sometimes changed shape depending on who was present. Lisa, of course, was a constant. Her visits and calls perfectly timed, always seeming to arrive just as tempers flared or rumors took root. The first break in the monotonous cycle arrived midweek. While sorting the mountain of laundry that seemed to accumulate in the hallway, Emma found a crumpled sheet of printer paper in Ben's jeans pocket. The paper was covered in childish handwriting, a letter addressed to the school counselor. It was unsigned, but unmistakably Ben's. The words caught Emma off guard. "I miss Mom. I wish things would go back. Emma makes everything different." There was nothing cruel in it, only the honest confusion of a little boy caught between worlds. Emma folded the paper, heart aching, but a seed of understanding took root. She began to look for other traces, hidden causes behind the surface chaos. On a Saturday, when the house was unusually quiet, Emma wandered into the kitchen and saw a stack of mail had been knocked to the floor. As she bent to gather the envelopes, a glossy photo slipped out. A family picture, taken long ago, with Lisa and David, the kids impossibly young. Scrawled in Sharpie on the back was an angry, childish message. "She's not really part of us." Emma closed her eyes, feeling the weight of exclusion, but also noting how neatly the moment fit within the pattern of recent events. If the children's feelings were painful but understandable, the specifics of her being wrongly blamed were less so. A chance came one chilly afternoon as she was tidying Hannah's room. Hannah had abandoned half-folded laundry and disappeared into her music. In an open notebook on the desk, Emma glanced at a column labeled "To Do with Mom," and below it, "Ask Mom About Phone." That triggered a memory. The day Hannah's phone went missing, Hannah had been texting with Lisa in the hours before the blow-up and insisted only Emma could have taken it. Emma's mind sharpened. She pulled together what she remembered. Hannah's phone had vanished amid a chaotic hour when Lisa had stopped by to drop off homework. Lisa had spent most of the visit alone in the entryway, waiting for David, and Hannah had been sulking in her room. Suddenly, the missing phone and all the misplaced blame seemed less like coincidence and more like choreography. Emma decided to tread carefully as she gathered information. She started checking details about every recent mishap: Ben's lost soccer cleats, Hannah's missing library book, the ruined art project. Instead of confronting the children, she retraced their steps, quietly sifting through the house for clues. Her diligence paid off sooner than expected. While returning Ben's textbooks to his desk, Emma noticed a pair of brand new soccer cleats, Ben's size, stuffed at the back of his closet. The receipt was inside the shoebox, but the date was recent, and neither Emma nor David had purchased them. Ben had claimed Emma had hidden the old pair. Here was evidence that, left to their own devices, the children were bending the truth. Emma snapped a discreet photo of the closet, time-stamped it, and made a note to herself. Emma's next strategy was technological. With careful respect, she checked the Find My app on the family's shared tablet, which still had Hannah's phone listed on it. To her surprise, the day the phone had gone missing, its last ping had been at Lisa's house, just 3 blocks away. The phone had later reappeared mysteriously in Hannah's backpack after a weekend visit to Lisa. Emma took screenshots and emailed the history to herself, heart racing. The evidence now felt as undeniable as the pain of not being believed. As the week unfolded, Emma began to create a careful dossier. She stored her findings in a private file on her laptop: photos, digital receipts, screenshots of text conversations, even her own written summaries of the events. She wanted to avoid drama or escalation, but she also resolved that when the time came to defend herself, she would meet accusation with facts, not just feelings. The process was not easy. There were days when gathering information felt intrusive, even wrong, and Emma questioned whether her methods would only make things worse if discovered. But each time she hesitated, she remembered the look in Officer Rodriguez's eyes, the chill in her supervisor's email, the toll this false narrative was taking on her sense of self. Through all of this, Emma tried to maintain her connections with the children, however strained. When Ben asked her for help with homework, her guidance was gentle, her praise genuine. With Hannah, she continued to invite, rather than insist. "Would you like to join me for a walk? Want company at the mall?" The answers rarely changed, but Emma pressed on, believing that patience and consistency might one day outweigh suspicion. Outside the house, Emma watched the neighborhoods of Willow Creek for evidence of hostility and sometimes small signs of support. Not everyone believed the whispers. Mrs. Patel across the street greeted Emma warmly every morning, and a new neighbor, Carmen, whose son played soccer with Ben, made a point to chat after practice. Emma found herself confiding in Carmen one afternoon at the park, careful not to disclose too much, but grateful for a sympathetic ear. "You know," Carmen said quietly, "people talk a lot, but talk is just wind. You're still standing." Emma tucked that wisdom away. Bit by bit, Emma started to see connections that had been invisible before. When Lisa visited, the tension at home always seemed to spike in the days afterward. The children, especially Hannah, would come back edgier, more insistent that Emma was at fault for every little mishap. Yet Emma noticed whenever she left positive notes on the kids' desks or made their favorite snacks without comment, their resistance softened, if only for a moment. By the end of the second week, Emma's collection of facts offered a clearer picture than she'd dared hope for. The string of evidence pointed not only to misunderstandings, but to quiet manipulation. Knowing this, though, was not enough. Emma understood that whatever came next would require courage, not just to defend herself, but to face the pain inside her own family. Late one night, as she reviewed her growing file, Emma felt the shifting momentum. The silence in the house was thick, but no longer suffocating. She was preparing, quietly and methodically, to confront the truth, not as an angry outsider, but as someone ready to reclaim her place and set the record straight. For the first time in many weeks, Emma allowed herself a flicker of hope, facing the truth. After weeks of secret investigations, mounting evidence, and silent heartbreak, Emma knew she could not keep living as a passive spectator in her own life. Something in her had hardened, a quiet flame that wouldn't allow her to hide anymore. The careful file she'd built, full of dates and screenshots and tiny revelations, was more than self-defense. It was a mirror reflecting not only where the problems began, but where understanding might begin as well. The following Saturday dawned gray and still. Emma awoke early, sitting at the edge of her bed, heart pounding, rehearsing what she wanted to say. It would be easier to keep pretending, but she was done letting others shape the story of her family. By mid-morning, Emma had made her decision. Today, she would face the household, one honest conversation at a time. She started with Ben. He was sprawled on the living room rug, drawing comic book characters with earnest concentration. Emma sat quietly beside him, waiting for him to look up. When he finally glanced her way, she offered a gentle smile. "Would you mind if we talked for a minute?" she asked. Ben shrugged, cautious but not unfriendly. Emma kept her voice steady. "Ben, I know things have been hard. A lot is different, and you miss the way it used to be. I know you love your mom, and I don't want to replace her." His shoulders tensed, but he listened. "But it hurts me when you say I lost your things or ruined your homework, especially if it isn't true." Ben's lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, Emma feared silence. But then Ben muttered, "Sometimes Hannah says you did it." He paused. "And Mom does too. When we talk about stuff missing." He turned his drawing over, refusing eye contact. But there was a nervous honesty in his posture. "I just don't know who to believe. I just want everyone happy." Emma's heart ached for him. "It's okay to feel torn, Ben," she said softly. "I want you to know you can always talk to me, even if you're mad. But it's important to be honest and to check before we blame someone." He nodded, barely perceptible, but a start. Emma squeezed his shoulder gently before letting him return to his superheroes. Next was Hannah, who would be far less easy to approach. She found the teenager in her room, headphones on, surrounded by stacks of books and clothes. Emma knocked lightly. "Can we talk for a minute?" Hannah rolled her eyes, but didn't protest when Emma entered. She didn't try to sit. Instead, Emma stood by the bookshelf, her hands folded. "Hannah," she began, "I know you never asked for any of this. Me, this move, the way things changed." Hannah huffed, but Emma pressed on. "I'm not asking you to like me, but I do want to understand. Lately, a lot of things have happened. Your phone, the library book, the tension. I know you and your mom talk about these things, but I found some evidence that shows things might be different than what you think." Hannah's eyes flashed with something between anger and fear. "You went through my stuff?" she demanded, arms crossing defensively. Emma shook her head. "No, not unless I had to clean. But some things just showed up. And the family tablet keeps track of devices. I know where your phone went when it was missing." Hannah's mouth opened, then clamped shut. Emma's voice softened. "All I want is for us to be honest. If there's something happening that I need to know about, please tell me. I want this house to feel safe for all of us." Hannah finally met her gaze. Angry tears glinted. "It doesn't feel fair. Mom says you're trying to replace her, that if we like you or want you around, it hurts her. She tells me things, and then I don't know what's real or not, and Dad just keeps pretending everything is fine." The admission, once out, seemed to drain Hannah's resistance. "I just want things to go back to before," she whispered. Emma's eyes filled with sympathy. "I know. I sometimes wish that for you too, but we can't ever go back. We can only go forward, together or apart. If you want to check the evidence I've collected, I want you to see what's true for yourself. I want to earn your trust, not steal it." They stayed in the room a moment longer, the tension between them quieter, if not yet resolved. David was next. Emma found her husband outside, pacing the porch, with a mug in his hand, lost in thought. She joined him, laying the slim folder on the patio table between them. David, I need you to look at this, not as my husband, but as someone who cares about the truth for this family. David's brow furrowed as he opened the file. Emma watched him sort through receipts, timelines, digital pings, and her written notes. He said nothing for a long time, the only sound the creak of rocking chairs and distant chirping of autumn sparrows. Finally, he set the pages down. You've been going through all this alone? I didn't realize how deep it was. His voice was thick. I thought things would settle on their own. I see now how much that's hurt you. He covered her hand with his. I should have paid attention sooner. I should have stood up for you more. Tears filled Emma's eyes, but she blinked them away. We can't fix what's already happened, David, but we can fix what comes next. I need to know I'm not fighting for this family by myself. He nodded, silent apology in his worn features. Late in the day, when the sun had lowered in the sky and long golden light angled through the kitchen window, Emma gathered everyone for a family meeting. Hannah sat stone-faced. Ben worried his sleeves. David hovered anxiously, but no one left. Emma shared what she'd discovered, gently, factually, with as little blame as possible. She spoke of mistakes, mixed feelings, and the power of rumors over reality. Most of all, she talked about what it meant to be a family, about the work, patience, and forgiveness involved, and how none of it could exist without honesty. It was not a magical solution. There were no tears of joy, no sudden hugs, and no perfect words to erase months of wounds. But for the first time, real feelings were being aired. Ben admitted to blaming Emma because it was easier. Hannah confessed how lost she felt between her parents. David pledged to be more present and to shield Emma from unfair scrutiny. Even Lisa, when invited for a small, tense conversation later that week, was forced to confront her own role in spreading suspicion, her usual composure cracking where truths had finally found daylight. That night, after the children were asleep, Emma sat with David on the porch, feeling the heaviness inside her ease. The family was still fractured, trust was no quick repair, but the cycle of silent resentment had been broken. Emma didn't know how long it would take to truly belong, but for the first time, she believed that healing was possible. She had thought the truth would destroy what little peace remained. Instead, facing it together turned out to be the first grace Willow Creek had offered her since she arrived. The truth revealed. The days following the family meeting hung suspended in an uneasy quiet, as though Willow Creek itself was holding its breath. Emma moved through the house with a cautious hope, wondering if the fragile honesty now exposed between the walls of her home would finally widen the path for healing. Yet, deep down, she knew that the kind of rupture they had experienced could not be healed in private. The lies and doubts that had poisoned their family had also seeped into the neighborhood, and the time had come for the truth to reach beyond the Bailey's front porch. The first tremors came on a Friday, almost imperceptibly at first. That morning, Ben left for school unusually early, his backpack slung haphazardly over one shoulder. Emma watched him from the kitchen window, noticing how he hesitated at the end of the driveway, then turned and waved. A small, tentative gesture she hadn't seen before. Hannah, meanwhile, seemed preoccupied, her gaze flitting between her phone and the journal on her desk, as if weighing whether opening herself in writing could be safer than doing so aloud. Later that afternoon, the house phone rang. It was Mrs. Patel, a kind neighbor who had always offered a smile and warmth amid the chilly gossip of Willow Creek. "Emma, do you have a moment?" she asked. There was an uncertainty in her voice. "Of course," Emma replied, anxiety fluttering in her stomach. "My son told me something unusual. He said Ben explained that the stories going around about you aren't right. He told a couple of his friends that he and Hannah said things because their mom was upset and they didn't know how to fix it when everything got out of hand." Emma felt her knees weaken, a dawning mix of relief and dread. The truth, it seemed, had begun to crack the dam. Emma thanked Mrs. Patel, hung up, and sat at the kitchen table with her head in her hands. It was a simple start, but in a community like theirs, the smallest shift could bring an avalanche. That evening, Hannah came to Emma's door, a rare occurrence in itself, and lingered, biting her lip. "Mom's mad," she whispered. "She says you're turning everyone against her." Her voice trembled, but her eyes searched Emma's for answers, not blame. "I don't know what to do. I didn't think people would talk so much." Emma didn't reach out. She simply met Hannah's gaze and said, "None of us has been fair. Least of all me, for not talking sooner. The truth will be hard, but it's the only way we heal." Hannah nodded and left, but her presence had left a door open, a narrow one, but real. The following days brought the storm Emma had braced for. Word spread among the school's parents that Hannah had owned up to embellishing stories, admitted she'd exaggerated about bad things at home. To her friends, when upset with Emma, Ben, in an impulsive show of emotion during a class, told his teacher that he was tired of lying and about stuff, and that they just wanted their mom to be okay. The children's confessions set off a chain of conversations. Parents who once avoided Emma now eyed her curiously at drop-off, their postures less suspicious, more uncertain. But the heart of the storm was Lisa. When Emma arrived at the next PTA meeting, an event she had dreaded for weeks, she felt the air shift as several parents fell silent. Lisa was already there, face carefully arranged in a patient smile, surrounded by her usual group of allies. Emma took her seat quietly at the back, clutching a folder containing the evidence she'd compiled. The meeting's agenda droned on, but side conversations buzzed with barely concealed energy. Finally, when the topic turned to family involvement, Mrs. Callahan, usually the queen of polite deflection, cleared her throat. "I think there's been some confusion in the community lately," she said, her tone pointedly neutral. "Perhaps it would help if we all heard from the families involved directly, instead of relying on rumors." Silence fell. Emma felt the weight of every gaze turned toward her and Lisa. Lisa spoke first, her voice measured. "My children have struggled with a lot of change, and sometimes kids exaggerate, especially under stress. I've only ever wanted what was best for them." Emma stood, her heart hammering in her chest. "I agree, Lisa. Change is hard. But I've spent months being blamed for things I didn't do. I have documentation, messages, receipts, even digital records that show how some of these stories started and that the truth isn't what it seemed." She paused, looking at every parent in the eye. "I'm not perfect, but I believe the facts, and what my family shares in private should matter more than what's whispered on sidewalks." A tense murmur rippled through the room. Lisa, caught off guard, pulled her bag closer and looked down. By now, enough parents had heard their children admit pieces of truth that Emma's statement rang with credibility. One by one, a few parents spoke up in support of Emma, or at the very least, voiced regret for speaking without knowing all sides. In the weeks that followed, Willow Creek's conversation shifted. No mass apology was offered. Such things rarely were. But Emma noticed a change. Invitations to school events were renewed. Neighbors who averted their eyes before now offered cautious greetings, some even murmuring quiet words of apology or encouragement. It was not a vindication, but a gradual release from the icy grip of communal suspicion. At home, the impact was deeper and more complicated. Hannah and Ben each wrestled with guilt, relief, and embarrassment. Hannah, always proud and defensive, found it hardest to move past her mother's sense of betrayal and her own role in the spiral. She began seeing the school counselor at Emma's suggestion, sometimes emerging from sessions red-eyed but resolute. Ben, in his innocent way, seemed lighter, sometimes chatty, sometimes just willing to curl up beside Emma as they watched TV, a sign of cautious acceptance. David, once passive and reticent, was jolted by the public reckoning. "I should have done more," he admitted late one evening, sitting with Emma on the porch. "I let my fear of conflict make things worse for you, for all of us." Emma squeezed his hand and replied, "It's not about blame anymore. It's about what we do next." Lisa, for her part, began to retreat from the center of the Bailey family's world. Her control, once maintained by whispered stories and veiled concern, eroded as the children questioned her statements, and the community shifted its gaze. Though she bristled at the loss of sway, even Lisa couldn't withstand the new clarity sunlight had brought. Her visits grew briefer, her calls less frequent, and her words more cautious. For Emma, the unraveling of the old false story meant facing a new set of challenges, learning how to build honest trust with the children, discovering how to forgive those who had hurt her, and rediscovering her own confidence after so much doubt. The pain of the past lingered, but so did the possibility of healing. And as October trees gave way to the bare branches of November, Emma realized that the truth, though jagged and sometimes lonely, had finally made space for her to breathe again. Dialogue and forgiveness. For the first time since Emma had joined the Bailey family, their living room became a place not of silent tension, but of open-hearted confrontation. The days following the storm of truth had not been easy. The house echoed with awkward silences, and each family member navigated a landscape reshaped by guilt, regret, and uncertainty about the future. But after so many months of secrets and quiet resentments, Emma knew they could not afford to retreat into old patterns if they truly wanted to heal. The idea for a family dialogue had first been suggested by Hannah's counselor. "Sometimes," she'd said, addressing both the teenager and Emma during a joint session, "we have to risk discomfort to break the cycle. Real forgiveness can't begin until everyone has their say." Emma understood the truth in those words. Outward honesty had begun clearing the air outside their home, but what lingered beneath their own roof needed to be brought into the light. So, one cool Saturday evening, after dinner, plates had been set aside, but before the family could drift to their usual corners, Emma asked everyone to gather in the living room. The children glanced at one another, wary but willing, and David, who had promised to support Emma, perched on the edge of his chair, at once vulnerable and resolved. She'd even called Lisa and invited her to be present, insisting gently that this was about more than blame. To Emma's surprise, Lisa agreed, arriving just as dusk began to settle outside, her face carefully composed. Emma spoke first, choosing her words with care. "Thank you all for being here. I know it might feel strange, but we've spent so long avoiding what hurts that I'm afraid we'll always be stuck otherwise. Before anything else, I want to say I know I've made mistakes. I didn't always know how to help you, Hannah, or how to connect with you, Ben. And David, I've struggled to tell you when I felt lost. I'm not perfect, but I am here. I want to find a way forward as a family, whatever that might mean for us. She paused, then offered the floor to anyone else ready to speak. Ben broke the silence, squirming as he looked from his stepmother to his dad. I just, I miss when things were easy. I didn't want everyone to be mad. Sometimes I said things about Emma that weren't totally true because Mom was already upset and I wanted her to feel better. But it wasn't fair. I'm sorry. His voice was trembling, his sincerity raw. Hannah, her cheeks tinged with red, stared at the floor for a long moment. I said a lot of stuff to my friends about you, she muttered, glancing up at Emma. About the house, about Mom, about everything. Whenever Mom was sad, she'd tell me you were changing us. And when things went missing, it was just easier to go along with it, to blame you, than to argue. I was mad, and I didn't care who I hurt. That's not okay. She swallowed hard. I'm really sorry, Emma. Lisa cleared her throat, keeping her gaze fixed on her hands. For the first time, her composure truly slipped, and her voice was softer than Emma had ever heard it. I let my own fears run the show. When David and I divorced, and you moved in, Emma, I felt like the world I built was slipping away. Maybe I wanted the kids to be loyal to me. Maybe I was scared of being replaced. So when they came to me, angry or sad, I didn't always set things straight. I sometimes fueled it. I told myself I was protecting them, but I see now that I just made it harder for everyone. I apologize to all of you. A heavy quiet followed, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the wind brushing the window frames. David was the last to speak. I've been too quiet through all of this. I thought if I avoided conflict, things would eventually work out on their own. That wasn't fair to you, Emma, or to the kids, or even Lisa. It's my job to protect this family, and that means being willing to have these hard conversations, even when I'm not sure what to say. As the apologies and confessions hung in the air, Emma felt tears slip down her cheeks, not only for the pain resurfacing, but because she could sense something shifting. Thank you, she whispered. I can't pretend it stops hurting right away, but it means the world that you're all willing to try. That's the only way we have a chance. Emboldened by the openness, the children began asking questions they'd previously saved only for whispered conversations with each other or their mother. Why did you want us to call you Mom? Ben asked Emma, his voice curious now, not accusing. Emma shook her head. I never wanted to take your mom's place. I wanted you both to call me whatever felt okay. I only wanted to matter to you, even in a small way. Hannah wiped a sleeve across her eyes, voice hoarse. Are you going to leave? I mean, after all this? Emma moved to sit beside her. I'm not giving up. Family isn't just about blood or perfect days. Sometimes it takes fighting for each other. Messy, complicated, but honest. I want to stay and earn your trust, however long it takes. Lisa continued listening quietly, her own mask of resentment thawing as she saw her children beginning, for the first time, to allow themselves hope for a family that could include Emma. She managed a tentative smile for Emma, not forgiveness, but a kind of gratitude. David clasped Emma's hand. Let's agree to talk, really talk, when something hurts, instead of letting it fester. We owe ourselves and the kids that much. And Lisa, you'll always be a part of their lives. None of us can change the past, but maybe we can do better for them together. The conversation stretched late into the evening, gentle and brave by turns. They swapped painful memories for honest questions and found laughter again, if cautiously. Each apology sparked another, until the space between them felt less like a minefield and more like common ground. Forgiveness, they agreed, would not be delivered in a single cathartic moment. Instead, it would arrive in steady, uncertain steps, in Hannah helping Emma cook dinner, in Ben bringing home a drawing and placing it on the fridge, in Lisa easing the boundaries she once so jealously guarded, in David learning to stand up when silent passivity would have been easier. The road to repair would not be a straight line. There would be missteps, regressions, old hurts, returning in stressful moments. But as the family prepared to wind down for the night, something essential had shifted. They had broken the silence that once defined the Bailey house and had begun, imperfectly but sincerely, to replace it with dialogue and the first touches of forgiveness. For the first time, Emma felt that she was not simply surviving in her home, but truly beginning to belong. Consequences and change. The hard-won honesty of the Bailey family's living room did not remain confined behind closed doors for long. The effects of truth-telling rippled outward, subtle at first, then unmistakable, changing the rhythms of daily life, not only inside the blue-shuttered house, but throughout the tree-lined streets of Willow Creek. Lisa felt the shift before anyone else. It showed up as silence at first. A neighbor who once waved as she jogged past now nodded curtly and looked away. Or a PTA friend who stopped her in the school hallway only to offer a brief, uncomfortable greeting before bustling off. For years, Lisa had curated her image as the devoted mother, the sympathetic ear, the one who could be trusted with everyone's secrets and complaints. That image now flickered at the edges, replaced by something uncertain and brittle. At school pickup, Lisa noticed other parents gathered in smaller, tighter clusters, their laughter dying down when she approached. She tried to act as if nothing had changed, but the isolation was relentless. No longer could she rely on whispered alliances or sympathetic looks. For the first time, she felt the loneliness of having been the architect of so much discord. There were no confrontations, no outright denouncements, just the slow, steady removal of warmth. The community that had once been her safety net had become a subtle jury, one that did not hand down verdicts so much as allow its sentences to be lived every day. The most stinging consequence came at home with her children. Ben and Hannah, once desperate for her validation, now grew tentative around her, as if catching themselves in the act of seeking her approval. Ben especially seemed torn, wanting to please both mothers, seeking to belong, but wary of being caught between loyalties. Hannah, newly honest about her feelings, threw up boundaries instead of lashing out, refusing to talk about Emma behind her back, or to indulge her mother's lingering bitterness. One evening, after a tense dinner, Lisa drove Hannah to a late study session and tried to steer the conversation back to familiar ground. You know, it's still okay to miss how things used to be, I do too, Lisa offered, voice gentle, searching. Hannah stared out the window, her voice small but firm. I miss the before, but I don't want to go back. I want things to actually get better. Lisa reached out, but Hannah only smiled, a sad, defensive smile, an ocean of growing up lying between mother and daughter, one that Lisa could no longer cross by undermining Emma. It was a revelation, but a painful one. Her children were finally forming their own judgments, moving out from beneath her shadow. David, for his part, was forced by circumstance and conscience to confront his own failures. For too long, he'd played the role of mediator, sidestepping conflict with the hope that patience would smooth everything over. The fallout from the months of rumor and blame made avoidance impossible. He found himself stranded in uncomfortable self-reflection. While driving alone, mowing the lawn, or picking up groceries, he replayed conversations in his head, hearing the ways in which his silences had spoken louder than his words. Each time, Ben or Hannah reached for Emma without flinching. Each time, Emma smiled with less caution in her eyes. David knew what was at stake. For the first time, he understood that protecting peace sometimes meant confronting pain, not ignoring it. Determined to change, David began to step forward in ways he never had before. At school meetings, he volunteered to speak for the family, never letting Emma face the room alone. At home, he initiated small acts of support, helping Emma clear the table, offering to handle difficult conversations about schedules or screen time, and most importantly, telling his children how proud he was of their toughness in facing the truth. When he caught Hannah lingering in the kitchen, he invited her to talk about books, about her friends, sometimes even about Emma. With Ben, he spent more time outside, working on forgotten projects, or just kicking a ball around in the backyard, letting his son's quiet gratitude show in moments between words. For Emma, these visible changes were both a balm and a challenge. The scars of months spent as a scapegoat could not vanish overnight. She still flinched inwardly when neighbors paused too long in conversation, or when Lisa's name appeared on her phone, but the difference in her confidence was tangible. She told herself that belonging was not a prize to be won, but a space to claim, little by little, with each honest encounter. There came a day, a gray, unremarkable Thursday, when both children came up to join her, watching a rainstorm from the porch, Ben leaning against her shoulder, Hannah quietly asking for help with an essay. The moment was fragile, tentative, but real. Lisa, meanwhile, had to reckon with the loss of control she'd built her world around. She found herself facing new, unfamiliar questions. Who was she, apart from the story she'd shaped for others? Who would stand beside her now, when her old alliances had fallen away? The answers did not reveal themselves easily, but Lisa began to understand that her own healing might start with letting her children choose their own happiness, even if it included Emma. Gradually, Willow Creek adjusted, the gossip faded, replaced by a new politeness tinged with humility. Some parents apologized to Emma in small, halting ways. A smile at the coffee shop, a thank you at a bake sale, the offer to carpool to a field trip. Trust having been broken, was slow to rebuild. But Emma found that sincerity mattered more than sweeping gestures. As she grew steadier in herself, those around her did too. Their care no longer a performance, but something genuine, if subtle. The family learned to speak up, even when it was awkward or risked causing pain. They scheduled regular check in conversations, sometimes with a counselor, sometimes just together at the dinner table. When they slipped into old habits, they called each other back. Emma and Lisa had uneasy but civil exchanges, both knowing it would take time to fully forgive and accept. Emma and David learned to share burdens, not hide them. Ben and Hannah began to confide in their stepmother in small, precious ways, testing the waters of a different kind of love. By the first frost, the Bailey family no longer felt fragile. They weren't perfect, but they were real, bound by disagreements as well as apologies, by a willingness to speak the truth, and by the hard but hopeful lessons that come when consequences are met not with punishment, but with change. For Emma, the truest sign of transformation came not from dramatic declarations, but from the ordinary rhythms of daily life restored. A messy kitchen after pancake breakfast, David's hand on her back while cleaning up the yard, Hannah's laughter echoing from her room, Ben's drawings tacked to the fridge, each one a quiet, hard-earned promise that the past would not define them. And as autumn's final leaves fell, the Bailey house, for the first time, felt less like a battleground and more like a home. A new beginning. With the arrival of November's first frost, Willow Creek felt transformed. The trees, stripped of their fiery leaves, stood etched against steely skies, a reminder that even the most brilliant seasons must eventually make way for something quieter, something new. Inside the Bailey house, that transformation was no less striking. Where the halls once thrummed with suspicion and unspoken wounds, there was now a tentative peace, delicate but unmistakable as fresh ice on the grass. It didn't happen all at once. The process of becoming a family, an honest, imperfect, messy family, had not been sealed by a single conversation or apology. Instead, it was painstakingly built, day by slow day, like stitches closing a long open wound. Emma, more than anyone, understood that the repairs would never be seamless, and that scars, once earned, were never entirely erased. She woke up early on the first truly cold Sunday, the kind of morning when every window was rimmed with silver, and the furnace kicked on with reassuring regularity. Slipping downstairs, she found David already sitting at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around his coffee mug, staring through the window at the sleepy street beyond. "Can't sleep either?" Emma teased gently, setting the kettle on the stove for tea. David smiled, lines of fatigue now mingling with a new softness around his eyes. "Just thinking about how far we've come and how much I never want to go back to how it was." She sat beside him, folding her hands over his. "You know, some mornings I still brace myself for something to go wrong. Old habits, I guess." "Me too," he admitted. There was a long, comfortable silence, punctuated only by the hiss of the kettle. But then I look around and realize this, us, is worth the hard days. I wouldn't trade it. Upstairs, the sound of Hannah's laughter drifted down the hall. a small miracle all its own. For weeks now, the invisible wall that separated Emma and Hannah had begun to crumble, not through grand gestures, but through small, ordinary moments, sharing a favorite song, collaborating on a complicated dinner recipe, or more often, just sitting side by side, each lost in her own thoughts, but sharing the space. Where once Hannah had closed herself in her room, she now ventured out unprompted. She sought Emma's opinion on a school project about women who showed resilience in history. Emma, touched but careful not to overstep, suggested several names, including her own mother, a woman of quietly remarkable strength. Hannah scribbled in her notebook, then, after a pause, added, "I think you're pretty resilient too, Emma." The words lingered between them, a cautious olive branch. Ben, ever the more transparent of the two, showed his affection in bursts. He'd shyly started inviting Emma to his soccer games again, glancing into the stands to catch her reaction after a good play, even if he pretended not to care. One afternoon, he handed her a drawing of their house, all of them inside, including Emma, arms wide as if gathering them all in. Emma nearly cried, but instead thanked him and pinned it to the fridge, where it joined a burgeoning collection of family mementos. Lisa's presence had shifted too. The air between her and Emma was not quite warm, but it was no longer icy. They shared quick check-ins during drop-offs and exchanged necessary updates about the children, keeping interactions focused and respectful. There had even been a day, on the sidelines of a snow-dusted soccer field, when Lisa turned and said quietly, "Thank you for sticking it out. I'm glad the kids have you." Emma simply nodded, understanding that this, for Lisa, was something like a benediction. Community life, once treacherously complicated, had begun to smooth. Neighbors now waved without hesitation. Ms. Patel stopped by with homemade chai and asked Emma if she would help organize this year's holiday food drive. At the grocery store, friendly greetings outweighed guarded glances. Emma was still occasionally aware of lingering curiosity. Stories travel faster than forgiveness, but she found herself less anxious, less afraid of what people might say. She had weathered the worst already and survived. Inside the Bailey house, new rituals took root. Sunday pancakes, once a source of awkwardness, now became a standing tradition, with everyone contributing. Ben at the griddle, Hannah in charge of fruit, David assigned to coffee, and Emma presiding gently over the organized chaos. There were board games in the evenings, quiet study sessions at the kitchen table, and ritual walks around the block just before the early sunset. Sometimes these routines felt unremarkable, but Emma cherished them. They were the foundation on which a true family could stand. Of course, not every day was easy. There were setbacks, old patterns reasserting themselves in times of stress, flare-ups of resentment or misunderstanding. Sometimes Emma would retreat to her car after a hard day, gripping the steering wheel and letting herself cry for a few stolen minutes. Sometimes Hannah disappeared into her phone again, or Ben sulked over a minor slight. Occasionally, Lisa would say something sharp, more out of habit than malice, but now these moments were met with communication, not silence. Emma and David learned to check in, Hannah learned to speak up, and Ben learned he wouldn't lose anyone's love for saying he was hurt. Thanksgiving arrived in a rush of family, food, and laughter. There was too much noise and not enough table space. Dishes were dropped, and the turkey ran dry. Yet Emma found herself standing in the doorway, watching the swirl of chaos and feeling unmistakably that she belonged. No one was performing, they were living. That night, long after the relatives had gone and the dishwasher hummed in the background, Emma found Hannah sitting alone on the back porch. She joined her, wrapping both of them in a thick blanket against the cold. "Still worried about fitting in?" Hannah asked, voice teasing but soft. Emma smiled. "Every day. But it gets easier." Hannah was quiet for a moment. "I'm glad you're here." The weight of those words settled around them, heavy in the best possible way. As winter crept slowly into Willow Creek, the Bailey house became what it was always meant to be: a refuge, a place where mistakes were met with forgiveness, where wounds were tended instead of ignored, and where every member, no matter how uncertain, had a seat at the table. The past would never be gone, but it no longer defined them. They had survived suspicion and jealousy, endured judgment, and learned painfully how to trust. The road ahead promised its own challenges, but as Emma watched snow begin to fall beneath the porch light, she allowed herself not only hope, but faith. This was a new beginning, and for the first time in a long time, she was exactly where she belonged.